In a sport renowned for complex intricacies and evolving positions, guard retention is one of the most difficult concepts to teach in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Different styles of guard have different considerations. Different athletes have different attributes. Some athletes are tall, others are flexible. Some are powerful, some are fast. One of the problems associated with open guard is the sheer number of options available to you as you play the position. You can be seated or supine, inside control or outside control, a large number of different grip variations, many types of guard to play, and seemingly infinite numbers of moves. The number of options can soon expand into a dizzying number, and in the heat of action, you can end up hesitating as you make choices. Playing guard has typically been a period of trial and error. Many mistakes were made in the gym in the pursuit of figuring out what works in each situation. Many of those mistakes will end up with your guard getting passed. There have been many attempts to conceptualize the topic to beginners. However, there is no one-size-fits-all unifying approach. But can we call it a science? In a new and ever-changing sport, it's unlikely that guard retention will ever be solved. Right? With a plethora of instructionals and social media content, there is certainly a consensus for what can be done in certain situations. The traditional learning approach was to learn a move for move. You go to do a knee cut pass, and I use what knowledge I have of knee cut passes to prevent it and retain guard. That's all well and good, but it's not exactly fast learning for beginners looking to become good quickly. Unsurprisingly, John Danaher attempted the idea of an academic course structure to something as broad as guard retention. His instructional, Go Further Faster, Guard Retention, clocks in around 7 hours and 20 minutes. That's a lot of information to retain before you can even start retaining your guard. But still, it was a good starting point. There is a definite theme throughout the 8 volumes, which is perhaps better explained by this graphic. The first idea of a guard retention system John provides is a general system versus a specific system. We want to start under a general system, following a set of loose guidelines until we can recognise and shift into a specific system or isometric position. John's components of the general guard system can be broken down into 2 sections: physical skills and tactical skills. Surprisingly, the physical skills required to maintain guard aren't that difficult. They don't require any extraordinary flexibility or strength and are suitable for nearly all body types. Physical skills can be broken down into posture, movement, and framing skills. The 3 postures of guard retention being seated, supine, and turtle. Each posture has their own respective movements, which are pretty easy to remember. There are only a limited number of viable moves from each position. Frames can be broken down by range: long arm frames for long range, forearm frames for medium range, backhand frames for close range. Tactical skills slot into volumes 2 and 5, where we can explore threat assessment via demarcation line theory. This is how we use certain lines of demarcation as indicators for how much danger a guard passer presents. We can measure the danger by lines that run through our own body. Our opponent will initially stay outside of our toe line, seek to beat our knee line, and work their way to our hip line. By outflanking us, they may bypass this and go straight for the shoulder line. In addition to this, we can measure lateral movement via our centre line, left side line, and right side line. We can typically stay in an offensive cycle until the opponent's trailing leg or lead knee reaches the line where our hips and sidelines meet. This is commonly referred to as the jeopardy point, or J point for short. The main takeaway from the 7-hour series as a whole is what John refers to as the knowledge denial method. As a general rule, in order to pass a person's guard, you need to do 5 individual and sometimes consequential tasks. Strip grips and impose our own. Create an angle so our center lines are misaligned. Close distance. Change level, which usually involves some form of chest-to-chest contact. And finally, pin the bottom athlete's shoulders to the mat and control their head, specifically their jawline. This last step is known as the cranial shift. Guard play can be very dynamic, so these tasks can often occur in a fraction of a second. It might be at a high speed, but the actions still need to take place. By denying the opponent one of these things, we should be able to prevent our guard being passed and prevent being pinned. By denying all 5, the amount of passing danger we face is reduced dramatically. We can make appropriate actions based on these 5 requirements and avoid committing unforced errors of chest exposure and head exposure. The rest of the products cover specific counters to the 6 most popular form of guard pass. This marks the move from the general system to the specific system. The 6 most popular passes discussed were the double underpass, the over underpass, the toreando, the knee slice, the leg drag, and the long step guard pass. Like I said earlier, it was a good starting point. At a certain point, the rubber must meet the road, and all the theory needed to be demonstrable in practice. Enter Marcelo Garcia. Marcelo Garcia is one of the greatest pound-for-pound jiu-jitsu competitors of all time, winning multiple gold medals in the ADCC 77kg division. Mostly known for his butterfly guard, one thing Marcelo would do from bottom position was to aggressively stay in the seated position. Marcelo was incredibly successful with this approach, often frustrating his opponents with arm drags, wrestling reversals, and harassing the feet as they tried to come near him. Provided you could manage distance effectively, staying seated radically reduces the options of the top player. Realistically, they become limited to 3 options. 1. Split the legs and establish an inside foot. 2. Step around the legs. Or 3. Push us back to supine posture. Perhaps more importantly, in a guard retention sense, Marcelo ruled out the need for supine and turtle postures. This helped reduce the possibilities he needed to remember by nearly 2/3. The best form of defence is attack, and if in a competition, it only makes sense to use your best weapons. The jeopardy point is a trigger for when the bottom athlete should be acting defensively. If opponents can't even get to the jeopardy point, Marcelo was free to attack at all times. Marcelo took a similar approach with his answer to the knowledge denial method. To complete a pin, a passer must make the cranial shift, where they go from passing the legs and controlling the hips to controlling the head. In order to prevent being passed or pinned, Marcelo realised that he only needed to prevent his head from being controlled. As a result, he developed a series of elbow push escapes where with momentum and timing, he would aggressively punish an opponent who reached for his head. Not only would he deny the guard pass, but he would often come up in top position. While Marcelo was probably never influenced by John Danaher, or even part of the leg lock revolution in modern jiu-jitsu, he may have unknowingly helped inspire the next generation of leg lockers. Having competed against Renzo Gracie, Marcelo was definitely an athlete John would have studied. John's star student, Gordon Ryan, has successfully won multiple ADCC medals using a similar approach of attacking from his seated guard. Standing opponents risk walking into a leg lock, while kneeling opponents risk getting swept. Instead of focusing on retaining guard in a general sense, which is typically reactive, Gordon instead focuses on staying in an offensive cycle where every reaction becomes systems based. Instead of focusing on being able to pass, his opponents are now reacting to him entering their legs, rather than him reacting to their guard pass. Traditional passing did not work on a skilled seated leg locker. This meant that new avenues of passing would need to be explored. Typical guard retention was based around making 4 points of connection with your opponent. It's not bad advice. In a gi, this is a reasonable ask. Without a gi, it's somewhat more difficult. The best connections in no gi are instead maintained via some form of leg entanglement. This gives competitive no-gi jiu-jitsu a much different flavour than competitive gi jiu-jitsu, where certain leg locks and reaps are considered illegal moves. Ashi Garami may not have been considered a classical form of guard, but it was certainly a position worth investing time in. It also worked wonders for distance management. Gordon modelled his guard retention on specifically dealing with how opponents with knowledge would counter his leg entanglements. Specific entanglements would require specific counters. One wrong move would be fatal on either player's part. If a passer moved the wrong way, they could get their leg broken. If the leg locker attacked the wrong way, they could get their guard passed. Once again, it looked like we were moving towards a more move-for-move style of retention. Back to the drawing board, it seemed. Memorising every reaction for every type of leg entanglement counter seemed like an arduous task. Fortunately, there are some shortcuts, provided you know what you're doing. This is where knowledge of Ashi groups comes into play. To pass a skilled leg locker, you have to understand leg locks. The classification of Ashi groups arose as a result of the following basic principle. Provided you can keep both of your feet on one side of your opponent's body, you are safe from leg locks. Keep both feet on one side of the opponent's body. It sounds simple enough. As we saw earlier with the knowledge denial method, a guard passer can't be passive while doing this. They need to be actively trying to get past the bottom player's legs and to the jeopardy point. For the bottom athlete, getting to a leg entanglement is not a guarantee there will be a successful leg lock. A skilled guard passer is going to either forward step or back step out of danger. Not only will they be out of the leg entanglement, but they will often be a step closer to passing your guard. Fortunately, whether the passer steps forward or backwards is entirely predictable. In order to forward step or back step, one foot must remain on the floor. Instead of memorising every individual leg entanglement, we can instead focus on where the planted leg of the guard passer is located. The planted leg can be in one of 4 positions. The foot can be at the bottom athlete's hip or shoulder. It could also be passed over to the opposite hip or passed over to the opposite shoulder. Each position has its own group of leg entanglements associated with it. These groups are creatively named Group 1, Group 2, Group 3, and Group 4. There is a special group, Group 5, but we'll talk about that one later. These groups also have a hierarchy of rankings, with Group 1 being the most desirable for the bottom athlete, and Group 5 being the least desirable. Group 1 entanglements are where the leg is passed across the centre line to the hip, and we have an Achilles grip around the passer's foot. Examples of this would be 50-50, cross Ashi Gorame, Ushiro Ashi X guard, and Ushiro Ashi reverse X guard. Group 2 entanglements are where the leg is passed to the shoulder across the centre line, and we have a scoop grip around the passer's knee. Examples of this would be Ushiro X guard and Ushiro reverse X guard. For groups 1 and 2, because we have already passed the foot across our centre line, the passer must forward step to remain safe. Group 3 entanglements are where the leg hasn't been passed across, and we have an Achilles grip around the passer's foot. This is where we see the classical Arimi Ashi Gorame, along with Ashi X guard and Ashi reverse X guard. Group 4 leg entanglements is where the leg has not been passed across, and we have a scoop grip around the passer's knee. This group is occupied by X guard and reverse X guard. For groups 3 and 4, our opponent is going to backstep in order to remain safe. Group 5 is a special group where we only have one entanglement, and that is outside Ashi. Outside Ashi is the exception to the rule. The passer can, but does not need to, take a step in this position. Instead, they can go directly into head control and chest-to-chest contact, which is not ideal if we want to prevent a guard pass. Remember what we said about the knowledge denial method? This links well with the findings of Lachlan Giles and everybody's second favourite Australian, Craig Jones, that outside Ashi is not a good position when the opponent is standing over us. The purpose of the group classifications is to provide the link between retaining guard and successfully applying a leg lock. Each of the 5 groups will trigger a different response regarding what actions we need to take in order to retain guard. Therefore, it is important to understand the classification of groups so we perform the correct response in order to remain in control. In order to remember which group is which, we can use the following table. Achilles grips are preferred to scoop grips, and passing the leg over the centre line is preferred when we can. Once a group is memorised and the path of the passer is known, the role of the retainer becomes easier. For instance, by only attempting straight Ashi Goramis on a standing passer, only Group 3 responses are required to be learned. Chess grandmasters won't memorise every action an opponent can take, only the actions that matter. Skilled leg lockers, like Gordon, were very much the same way. If they only used one Ashi group, retaining guard and working to a leg lock would certainly be easier. The prevalence of Ashi groups presents an obvious problem. Not all Jiu-Jitsu competitions allow leg locks, and it assumes you already have a decent understanding of how to apply them. Some schools don't even teach leg locks until brown belt level. Even then, getting to a leg entanglement on a skilled opponent is not going to be easy. A skilled passer is going to be wise to being put in a dangerous leg entanglement and will actively step around an opponent's guard if possible. As we saw earlier, if we remain seated, the passer has more than one option to attack our guard. Ashi-based guards are desirable as they prevented the cranial shift, a key element in completing a guard pass. They are fantastic for distance management and preventing chest-to-chest contact. With a variety of entanglements to choose from, we could keep the opponent at sufficient range and attack reasonably freely. We've discussed options for retention if the opponent is nearing a cranial shift via Marcelo's use of the elbow push. We've introduced the idea of leg entanglements to keep an opponent at range via use of the leg entanglements and knowledge of Ashi groups. But what happens when the opponent is in this in-between phase? What happens when we're unable to get to a leg, but the opponent is unable to get to our head? The answer, as always, falls back to the knowledge denial method. We still need to maintain distance via frames, but ideally get back to denying the opponent grips, angle, and level, especially if they are near the jeopardy point. Understanding what guards are useful at what range is key. To do this, we can break down guards into 3 types: long range guards, medium range guards, and close range guards. To be effective guard players, we need to be effective at all 3 ranges. Long range guards are where we are able to extend our legs and post on an opponent with our feet and hands. Medium range guards are where we can frame with our forearms and knees, but the opponent is too close to put our feet on them. Close range guards are where the opponent is nearly chest to chest and possibly close to completing the pass. Different types of guards will have different goals. As a general rule, we want to preserve knee to elbow connection, prevent chest to chest contact, and prevent our head being controlled. From a passing perspective, the shift from passing long range guards to passing medium range guards marks the shift from loose passing to tight passing. Gordon posited that if an opponent is able to avoid our leg entanglements, the next series of medium range scenarios would be as follows: cross hamstring, straight hamstring, north-south, stack passes, the body lock, and half guard. Just as Gordon's approach to the Ashi groups was born out of how passers would counter his leg entanglements, these scenarios were born of how he would pass a dangerous guard. Inside position is a concept based around moving opponents' limbs away from their centre line to create extension and submission opportunity. It also happens to be completely crucial for leg lock success. Ashi Garami is predicated on this concept. All of these medium range scenarios are all about shutting down an opponent's ability to get to inside position. The previous 6 most popular passes were not necessarily losing their popularity, they simply didn't evolve in an era where leg locks were as practiced. Students will be quick to note that Gordon's entire game is modelled around the concept of inside position, either to create submissions for himself or to deny submissions to his opponent. As a result of this, Gordon's game has a very fluid and unified feel to it. What makes it effective is not his selection of guards and leg entanglements, but more so what guards he chooses not to use. Gordon has many opportunities in his matches to go to De La Riva or closed guard, yet he rarely does. Just as Marcelo had ruled out supine and turtle postures, Gordon has deliberately foregone guards that rely on outside control. Outside control is where we move the opponent's limbs across the centre line to create back exposure. Despite Gordon's insistence on using inside position guards, you can still have success using outside control. In 2019, Lachlan Giles went on a tear in the ADCC Absolute Division. He secured the bronze medal after 4 matches against opponents who were all considerably larger than himself. He managed to achieve 3 inside heel hooks from what were considered unorthodox entries into leg lock positions. He had glossed over the battle for inside position. In fact, it looks like he was giving it away to his opponents for free. Lachlan found that as a smaller athlete, outside guards were preferable for keeping bigger athletes away. As a result of this, he came up with a series of sequences to enter into the legs from these outside positions. Opponents thought that by winning the initial battle for inside position, they were safe from leg locks. They needed to think again. Just as Gordon had positions where he wanted to be, and he understood what scenarios he would likely be facing, Lachlan too had a similar approach. He knew the guards he wanted to use, He knew what transitional moves he wanted to attempt. He knew where he wanted to finish. Even if you don't want to leg lock, knowing where you want to be greatly improves the success of your guard retention. An obvious question emerges. Which is better? Guards that favour inside position, or guards that favour outside control? Perhaps more important than this, selecting guards that go together. We have our inside guards like shin to shin, Ashi Garami, butterfly guard. We have our outside guards like Danaher, K guard, closed guard. We even have our in-between guards, so-called one leg in, one leg out guards, sit-up guards, reverse Danaher, and half guard would all fall into this category. We have our ranges, we have our guards, we know where we want to be, we have a plan if things start going wrong. So what next? Ultimately, guard retention will be measured on our ability to successfully attack our opponent and not let our guard be passed. If our attacks are good and don't have any mistakes, then we're probably not going to have to worry about getting our guard passed. If our attacks have mistakes in them, this is where the opportunity for our opponent to counter with a guard pass comes into play. White belts are easy to pass because they have limited attacks. Trying to pass a world-class black belt, on the other hand, can only be described as a nightmare. The best measure of success from bottom position is the ability to off-balance an opponent. This is often referred to as the Kazushi principle. Not only do we want to attack grips and frames, but we want to disrupt our opponent's base when we do. If the opponent is constantly regaining their balance, our attacks and sequences have a much greater chance of success. If the opponent is based well and we can't off-balance them, then our attacks are less likely to succeed. Whether we want to use leg locks, wrestling reversals, or traditional sweeping methods, all benefit greatly from off-balancing your opponent first. The guard position is the position which is most unique to Jiu-Jitsu. Many martial arts have punches and kicks, but few can fight from their back. Successful guard work is the epitome of Jiu-Jitsu. We pull our opponent into an area where they have limited knowledge and use our knowledge to defeat them. The key to a successful guard and subsequent retention is knowledge and understanding of the position we're putting our opponent in. We have solutions to the problems that they may present within whatever framework we're using. Top athletes can be successful with different styles, but each of them will have an area where they specialise. We've come a long way from John's general theory. By all accounts, Jiu-Jitsu is still a young and growing sport. As new techniques emerge, new guards will follow. Metagames will fall in and out of fashion. Moves once lost to history may soon become relevant again. The future of Jiu-Jitsu is exciting, and I'm here for it. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing. For more information about upcoming projects, please look out for updates on my community tab. Cheers.